he'll have an opinion on it.
This is The Roy Green Show.
A glorious Sunday to you. Sitting in for Roy Green, I'm Arlene Bynon. We're kind of putting things together, aren't we, at the end of the year, the concepts and the things that have become a pattern. One of them has been misconduct in the military. And Mercedes Stephenson interviewed Kate Armstrong, who's the first female cadet at the Royal Military College of Canada, and retired Lieutenant Colonel Mark Popov. He's former head of officer cadet training at the RMC, to talk about all these headlines about misconduct. They don't go away. Fresh ones really disturbing us as Canadians. Also, what's the plan to establish this review panel to analyze? We keep hearing the words culture, education, and training in the military. Here's Mercedes Stephenson on the West Block.
Alarming new numbers show that the number of troops who say they have experienced sexual assault has gone up. In 2022, around 2,000, that's about 3.5%, of regular force members surveyed say that they have been sexually assaulted in the workplace. That's more than doubled the rate from 2018. The defense minister insists the government is keeping their promise to deal with the scourge of sexual misconduct.
An increase in reporting is deeply concerning to us, but I think it can also be indicative of a perhaps greater confidence among victims that if they do come forward and bring forward their complaints, that they will be taken seriously.
Sexual misconduct and sexual assault carried out by senior brass is widely viewed as one of the most toxic dangers to the Canadian Armed Forces. It's something that all of the appointments and announcements in the military won't fix unless there's a change of culture of those in charge. And that culture is shaped by military colleges like Royal Military College and College St. Jean, the two universities that most Canadian military officers attend. It is there that countless victims and experts have alleged the problems with abuse of power and impunity begin. Will the review that the government announced last week bring long-awaited changes, and are things improving for those inside the forces in the face of such concerning sexual assault statistics? Joining me now is Kate Armstrong. Her memoir, The Stone Frigate, detailed her experience as the first female cadet at Royal Military College, and retired Lieutenant Colonel Mark Popov, the former head of officer cadet training at RMC. We first spoke to retired Colonel Popov a couple of years ago now, Mark, about what was happening at RMC and your experience in trying to sort out sexual misconduct, and you say losing your career for it. For those who aren't familiar, let's start with you, Mark. What are the problems that have historically existed for RMC when it comes to sexual misconduct?
Well, I think the biggest problem with RMC comes down to really not just sexual misconduct, the fundamental question of what is RMC for? The Prime Minister of Canada, Canadians, the Defence Minister, Chief of Defence Staff needs to decide, is it going to be a degree-granting institution, an academic university where the students wear uniforms, or is it going to be an officer training institution that provides junior officers to lead the sons and daughters that serve in the Canadian Armed Forces in some of the worst circumstances in the world? Coupled with that is the challenge of supervision and leadership. Typically at RMC, there's not very many, comparatively speaking, supervisors, commissioned officers and senior non-commissioned officers to guide and supervise the officer cadets in day-to-day and evening activities. And that shows. It's a large, uncontrolled population of young people, many of them away from home for their first time. And they need a little bit more guidance and direction than the current staffing and organization of RMC let happen.
Kate, you were the first female cadet, and it's always been fascinating to me that I was warned in advance when we started working on sexual misconduct that the military will allow a lot of this. They'll accept it. But if you go anywhere near Royal Military College, that is seen as untouchable. And you could actually see it online with a number of people who'd supported the examinations into sexual misconduct and the reckoning on that. But when we started talking about Royal Military College, there was a defensiveness that arose. Can you tell us a little bit about your sense of whether or not things have changed significantly from when you were first there?
I've heard from hundreds of people who have written to me and said, that's my story, that's my story. I've met cadets that have been at the college from my time all the way through to present day cadets. I know cadets that are at the college now. And what I wrote about, a lot of the historical, like traditional things happening that were disturbing are still continuing now.
I know, Mark, you witnessed some behavior there that was deeply disturbing, comments that were made to underage girls about sexual assault. When you tried to stand up to it, you say that your career was essentially ended because of that, destroyed it. You were not supposed to reprimand the cadets, they said. That was the problem versus the cadet behavior. Why do you think RMC in particular has been so resistant to change, if that allegation's true?
If you look at how RMC works, the commandant of RMC is the brigadier general that typically hopes to be promoted somewhere else, and they know the way to get promoted is to not make a mistake, not rock the boat, not have anything brought to attention. That was purely the case for the two commandants that I had the misfortune of working for. If you look at the West Point now, the superintendent of West Point is selected by Congress, understanding that will be his or her last posting. They will be there for, I believe it's a 4 to 5 year term, and their job is to provide junior officers to the U.S. Army. Full stop. That's what they have to do. So looking at that from a fundamental how RMC fits in the organization standpoint, it's not set up for success in terms of leading change, culture change, or addressing problems like I tried to address in a firm, forthright, and direct manner to make the system better.
The government has announced a review into Royal Military College and College Saint-Jean. It's taken sort of 2.5 years, I think, since we first started reporting on this for that to come out. What were your thoughts on Bill Blair's announcement about this last week? Did that look like a substantive review that's warranted to you?
Well, reading that, and I've read it a few times in detail, and I've read the biographies of all the board members, and I was not surprised yet amazed at how vague the announcement was. The board members to me look like the great fit. They've got a great mix of experience. They've got skin in the game, but not RMC skin in the game. So I think they'll really have a good chance to be objective. I would be very interested to see, and so would other Canadians, what the mandate letter is. What are they trying to find out? What deliverables do they have at the end of this year? So that's one thing that's really lacking in this announcement is what they're trying to see.
One last part that it might be lost, but certainly not least, I wanted to touch on was some of the information from the Statistics Canada survey that was released last week about sexual assault, sexual misconduct within the forces. In it, it reported not only higher numbers of sexual assault, which it's impossible for us to know if that's an increase in reporting or an increase in incidents, but we know certainly the reported incidents are up. But among those who say they were sexually assaulted, 64% said they did not report it. 64% said they did not report it. And 41% said the reason why they did not report it is because they did not believe it would make a difference. Kate, what does that say to you?
It talks about safety to me. And I believe that people that have been assaulted need to hear, I believe you. I'm sorry that happened to you. How can I help you? And to feel that is an honest response to them coming forward. And I also, just touching on the increase of the reporting, the safety, I believe that because of you and because of the work that's happening publicly around what is going on culturally, I believe that the safety or the perception of safety is increasing and it allows people to come forward. And that's the key. The key is to create an environment where a culture is just a shared dream. So everybody needs to be on the same page, like Mark was saying, about what is the shared dream that we have for RMC, for the cadets.
Mark, your thoughts? Do you think that things are improving when it comes to sexual misconduct and getting results when it's reported inside the forces and not punishing those who come forward?
Yeah, I have to agree with Kate on this. When my story came out, I was approached by a lot of former cadets, male and female, saying very much the same things. Hey, this is what happened to me. And a lot of the thread that ran through was, I didn't think the chain of command would take me seriously. I didn't think anything would be done. And I was scared that if I told my boss, I would lose out on course promotion opportunity. So I think what we're seeing now is, I personally don't think there's more assaults and misconduct, but I think there's more reporting. I am hopeful, and I honestly do think that the people that join the Canadian Armed Forces really, for the most part, want to do the best and respect each other. The current lapses in the justice system have done victims and accused no good. We've seen high-profile cases that have been dropped out, quashed because of incapable administration on the part of the Canadian Armed Forces, particularly the military police, in pursuing these. So there's double edges here. We're getting more reporting, I think. The system has to do better with addressing the reporting if the victim wants something to go ahead with it. But I don't see this spike in reporting as a massive increase in rape culture in the forces. I actually think it's that people are reporting because they're having more confidence in the system doing what's good for them.
Well, we certainly hope so, Mark. And sorry, go ahead, Kate.
I was just going to add that something else that comes up quite often is people that are effectively punished for having MST, like military sexual trauma, and they end up losing their careers, yet the perpetrators continue on and sometimes rise to great heights within the military. And that does not embolden people to come forward and put themselves at risk of that.
Yeah, and that may be part of that 41% who say that they're concerned that coming forward would not make a difference, something we'll continue to report on and look into. Thank you both so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mercedes Stevenson on the West Block on military misconduct as we wrap up some themes. Unfortunately, that is one of them. Lori Goldstein will join us as we talk about others. I'm Arlene Bynon. And for Roy Green, this is The Roy Green Show.
Digging deep into the issues that matter to you and not afraid to get his hands dirty while doing it. This is The Roy Green Show, sponsored by Seal Tech Flat Roofing on 900 CHML. The topics you care about, the voice you trust.
This is The Roy Green Show.
Thanks for joining me on this Sunday. I'm Arlene Bynon, filling in for Roy Green today with my old friend, Toronto Sun columnist Lori Goldstein, joining us live here. Lori, how are you on this Sunday?
Oh, I'm doing okay. But like you, the news these days astounds me.
I know. I want to talk about it, Lori. You know, usually at this time of year, we're going through little political missteps and this, that, and the other, and policies. But, you know, this morning, everywhere I look, it was kind of the same thing. And I said off the top of the show here, if someone had told me a year ago that we'd be having a discussion like this one, like anti-Semitism in the places that we are, I don't know if I would have believed them. But maybe some people from the Jewish community would have said I was wrong. Lori, what do you say?
Well, I think that, first of all, absolutely. This is not a thing that I thought we would be having to deal with to the level that we are now. I think you're right. I think, for example, in the Jewish community, a lot of children who grew up with parents and grandparents who survived the Holocaust were always told, you know, it can happen again. And I think the younger generation of Jewish people, many didn't believe that. And now it's sort of, well, actually, no, it can happen again. And now, let's be clear. Here in Canada, the authorities are protecting the Jewish people. I've talked before, but we've had 2 police command centers in my community where there are a lot of Jewish people almost from October 7th, because I think in a day or two later, a Jewish student got threatened. And so they've set up in our area, they've been here, and they're protecting Jews. And it's great. And we're all very grateful to them. It's just, I think where I sort of just broke a little was in this incident in the United States where 3 university presidents, 2 of them Harvard and UPenn, those are Ivy League schools, plus the president of MIT, one of the most prestigious universities in North America. And they're asked at a hearing, and they're being questioned about the outbreak of anti-Semitism on their campuses. And one of the questioners says to them, very simply, is a call for the extermination of the Jewish people, is that something that is covered by the harassment and bullying policies of your university? And they don't give a straight answer. They say things like, well, it would depend if they acted on it. I beg your pardon? You were asked if a call for the extermination, the genocide of the Jewish people was on your campus. You were basically asked, well, what would you do? And they went things like, it depends on the context. It depends on whether there's action. What do you mean? That they have to kill the person? Like, it flabbergasted me. These are supposed to be, these are presidents of three of the most prestigious universities in America. And it really left me speechless. It really did.
It is. I focused on it already as we open the hour here. I see, as I was consuming and gobbling up all the news that I could when I got up this morning, I see that Bernie Sanders was on Face the Nation and was really critical about this call for a ceasefire dealing with the terrorist group Hamas, and said let's face it, it looks like any Hamas supporters of a ceasefire, they've lost Bernie Sanders. What does that say about this moment? Because as we take a picture right now, there's people speaking on sides and saying things that I never anticipated.
Yeah, and I want to be clear here. It's also happening in Canada to the Palestinian community, the Arab community, the Muslim community. And I feel the same way about that as I do when Jews are attacked. We have to dial it down, for God's sakes. I'm reading about a mosque where they come to the mosque and there's feces on the doors. Mm-hmm. Like, are people going mad? Muslims and Palestinians and Arab people of those origins in Canada, and Jewish people in Canada of those origins, neither of us have anything to do with the policies of the Israeli government or the terrorism of Hamas. And the idea that people in Canada from those groups deserve to be punished or threatened for something they have nothing to do with, it just astounds me. It's like, how did this? And look, there's a lot of decent people. I'm not saying for a minute. Every time I write about this, I get all kinds of people.
I know you have to give all the provisos, but I appreciate you doing it. You do. Yeah,
no, but it's just, you just sit there and you and I'm like you, like, what the heck happened to us?
Yeah,
where liberal universities are saying these things. Where hundreds of doctors at the UT Medical School say that they are living in fear because of some of their other colleagues and what they've said. I mean, a doctor who gives anesthesia to patients in he calls Israel the devil, and he does it publicly. You just sit there and you sort of go on things like that. You do understand, right, that the Jewish community is divided on what Israel's been doing. There's a range of opinions. We're not all part of some central thing. There are Jews who are campaigning against the war. There are Arabs and Muslims and Palestinians who are saying what's going on here is insane. The one thing I do agree with about Bernie Sanders is when people tell you what they believe in, believe them. Hamas has said repeatedly, October 7th.
Yeah, and he did, and that's kind of a good part is where it's coming out from everywhere. We're going to take a break. Thank you, Lori Goldstein. You take care. Okay, have a better weekend there. Toronto Sun columnist Lori Goldstein. Roy Green Show continues.
If it's not in our best interest, it's not in his either. And he's going to speak up about it. This is the Roy Green Show.
numbers tell a story as we're getting near the end of the year. Lots of political stuff happening this week and the week before. It'll happen coming up in the next few days, all the way to the end of the year. And the one thing that is going to haunt and stick and create a, how shall we say, a mist and a fog that won't lift are the polls. What a Canadian story this is at this moment in time. We have all these factors coming together, and we've got a realization that we don't have a place to live. There is not just a housing shortage. It's a crisis. It's a crisis everywhere you look. And we've got inflation. We've got so many things coming together, and we have polls that have done a turnaround for the Liberals and a prime minister in a way that is a little bit of, how shall we say, dizzying. Eddie Shepherd is with us on this Sunday, Vice President of Insights at Abacus Data. Eddie, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us.
No problem. Thank you.
You know, I gave it a bit of a go there and put it out there, but it's true, isn't it? I mean, it really is quite incredible. I can hear the gasps as Abacus is releasing the polling, especially that 19-point lead just 7 days ago. And it was dangled in front of us in another poll. But that's not just a fluke, Eddie. How big is this, and how historically does this look?
In terms of the 19-point lead, this is the largest gap between the Liberals and Conservatives since the Trudeau government took power in 2015. So it's a sizable margin right now, and it's been growing steadily since around May of this year. So if you look back to May, they're only about 2 points apart between Trudeau and Poilievre. And since May, there's been kind of a downward trajectory for the Liberals, and the Conservatives have been continually gaining kind of that committed vote since then.
All right, let's just talk about all the factors, and then we'll get in to the details of what Canadians are thinking. But, you know, when you look at the polls, let's say you're the Liberal Party looking at the polls, they're looking for other factors. And we're looking for, I guess, things that could move and things that can't move, or maybe more difficult to move, or things that have never happened before. You know, the amount of voters that are available to vote for the parties, that matters. And that's really taken a turn for the Liberals as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think what we're seeing now is people are they want change. It's been a very hard year for a lot of Canadians, whether it's, as you mentioned in the intro, whether it's housing or inflation or the cost of living or whatever it may be. Canadians are really having a hard time this year. With no immediate end in sight. So people now are they're growing frustrated with the current government because they're perceiving them as not really doing a whole lot, and they want change. And our poll last week showed that about 2/3 of Canadians want a change in government. And now of that 2/3, not everyone thinks that there is a good alternative. But when people want change, that's when they go to vote more so than not. So I think we're really seeing a lot of shifts right now in the narrative, and people are starting to feel very frustrated, and they want to see a shift in government.
Yeah, they are, and we're seeing the frustration in the numbers, especially that the group that is available. Now, what about though for the Conservatives? They are looking at these polls, and they must be desperately not wanting them to go away. Any kind of numbers, whether it's radio ratings or political ratings, you got to try to hang on to it. And it's becoming not just, as we said, it's not just a fluke. On the other hand, there was a hunk of people who answered some of your polling, I understand, and they said they may go back to where they came from if certain things look a little bit funny. What do the Conservatives have to watch for right now?
I think right now we've really seen Poilievre kind of double down on housing, and I think that is one area where it's impacting almost every Canadian, whether directly or indirectly, and especially when you look. In the next 2 years, 60% of Canadians are going to renew their mortgage. So I think if there isn't a shift in the housing availability and accessibility and affordability, that's going to have a really negative impact. So I think, we saw the video last week that Poilievre released
right.
that was essentially groundbreaking in terms of that kind of political campaign. And it's had a massive impact. And I think by doubling down on arguably the most important issue for Canadians right now, they're really keeping that committed vote in their backyard.
They are, and it's in everyone's minds right now. And we were all waiting as a country. We thought, okay, in Charlottetown at the caucus retreat, I was there, and everyone was thinking, okay, well, when are they going to make all the flurry of announcement? The Liberals are going to step out, and they didn't. And the lesson seems to be from these numbers that we're getting here. If you let someone else define you or grab that definition, certainly politically, it doesn't work out.
Yeah, and I think we saw with the fall economic statements even, very few Canadians even knew that was happening and even knew what was within that. So I think what that tells above all else is that there's communication challenges right now. I think it's hard for some things to catch the airwaves and capture the minds of Canadians. But when you look at arguably one of the major federal announcements for an entire year, largely going unheard and unknown, that just shows that right now the Trudeau government is having a hard time capturing the eyes of Canadians and getting those airwaves, because they're not necessarily in survival mode just yet. But I think what we're seeing is they're trying to have this flurry of announcements and get eyes on them. But I think the frustration level of Canadians is so high right now that it's really hard for them to overcome that in the first place.
It is, as somebody said to me, kind of end of regime moves. And, we're not suggesting all of that's a fact as we watch this story play out, but they're having to move on things. As we waited for those housing announcements, we've just had a flurry of them. And Sean Fraser getting a lot of attention as the housing minister, trying to grapple with it. But the thing is, Eddie, I don't have to tell you, we're all learning just how long it would be to make something happen. This is not something you can turn around. It takes a long time.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I do believe that Sean Fraser is doing a lot of really great things in the housing. He's trying to be very creative and work as hard as he can. And I think he's made some really good strides. But I think the issue with housing in particular is that, Canadians want immediacy in terms of solutions. They can't wait a year or 2 years, because housing starts to take time and infrastructure takes time. So I think the challenge that there is when it comes to housing or inflation of the economy, Canadians have had a really hard year, and it's taken a toll on them emotionally and mentally and physically and financially. And now they want solutions. But the problem is that solutions being proposed right now aren't immediate solutions. So when you think of, next month or 2 months from now, the struggles will still be there, despite things, slowly falling into place. So I think that's a struggle that the Liberal government has right now, is that the hurdles they need to overcome they're not insurmountable, but they're large enough that they will not be able to overcome them in a short period of time. So they need to convince Canadians that they are doing things in their best interest and ensure them that they are working towards a solution.
It is. So when you talk about housing here, it is the key factor when you ask Canadians what's on their mind. And not everyone is insecure when it comes to housing. But do the polls show that even those who may own a house are still concerned about the overall situation?
Yeah, we've looked at housing extensively over the last few months. And it's really, those who don't own a home currently, a lot of young Canadians are starting to give up on the Canadian dream. They're starting to realize that maybe I can't buy a house in the near future or at all. And those who do own homes, there's a lot of uncertainty coming in the next year or two with, as I said earlier, 60% of Canadians renewing their mortgage in the next few years. Those individuals are likely going to see an increase in their interest rates because they likely signed on kind of during the COVID years for their interest. So there will likely be a huge shift in kind of the security of a home in the next few years, because it wasn't that long ago that you buy a home for financial security, for an investment. And right now that's really in jeopardy because of the overall cost of living, the cost of housing, and all that goes around that. So we're seeing that, Canadians aren't as confident in their home ownership. And a study that I ran last week saw that over 40% of Canadians are above the CMHC threshold of the 39% household income to mortgage. So there's a substantial proportion of Canadians that are really heavily leveraged in terms of their housing costs. And if the interest rates go up or anything shifts, we may see a fairly large transition in housing soon.
All right, we're going to take a break. Eddie, if you could stay with us, I want to stick with your last comment there, how we're on a precipice, however we feel and however we're shaking our heads at the crisis around us. If the wind blows the wrong way, it could even get worse. Eddie Shepherd, we're going to put you on ice, Vice President of Insights at Abacus Data. I'm Arlene Bynon in for Roy Green. This is the Roy Green Show. Welcome back. I'm Arlene Bynon in for Roy Green, and Hard Truths here. We're learning a lot from Eddie Shepherd, Vice President of Insights at Abacus Data. Eddie, before we went into the break, you talked about the percentage of Canadians who are waiting to see what's going to happen when they renegotiate their mortgage. We know the Bank of Canada held steady this week, and there was all sorts of indications they may do that as long as they can. But if they don't, Eddie, that is a historically large amount of people who could be flailing around. We've covered the possibility of this for some time. It was always kind of poo-pooed. No, it can't happen. Too big to fail. And the rates will never go that high. But all the word this week was they may never go back down to the level that people expected. Eddie, how vulnerable are people when you look at those numbers you've presented?
Very, to put it very blunt. I think what we're seeing is those who are renewing the next couple of years, they're the ones that arguably went in at historically low rates. So they were in the below 2%, fixed rate mortgages and things like that. So we do see a difference. People that have variable mortgages right now that are going to renew, they're a little more on edge than those who have a fixed rate mortgage. And I think part of that was those with a fixed rate, they have a little more of an ability to plan ahead. So they know that there are things likely won't change. So they can potentially put some money aside and try and save and build up for when those interest rates do shift. Those on the variable side have been a little more impacted just because of the kind of the wild fluctuations with rates that have been going on the last 3 to 4 years. But I think we're starting to see that people are considering alternative options because they need to start thinking of what might happen if they renew their mortgage and the rates are substantially higher than what they were at the current point in time. So whether it be taking on a second job, looking at taking out some equity from their homes, and potentially even having to sell their home. It's not a large proportion just yet, but I believe it's around 10% of Canadians that are going to renew are worried that they may end up losing their home. And that number, in my estimation, will likely increase as people become closer to having to renew.
It's happened before. It happened in the 90s. I knew people who it happened to, and they had jobs, kind of like the situation here, too. These are not people, this is not just an unemployment story, is it, Eddie? This is an interest rate story. It's everything kind of building up. So when you think about it all, housing is arguably the center of everything that's happening today. The impact of the economy, that's largely tied to housing. When you look at people's perceptions of immigration now as well, we're starting to see more negative views of the number of proposed new immigrants entering Canada next year. And a lot of this is tied to the availability and scarcity of housing. When you look at quality of life, people aren't able to do a lot of the things they once could because they're putting so much of their monthly income towards housing. So really, housing is kind of impacting all assets of all facets of our lives right now. And people are really, really struggling. It's not just an employment aspect because, employment levels have remained relatively stable for a while now. It's just that everything is built up to this point now where it's just expensive to live in Canada right now. And it is not just the big cities. It's the small cities too. They're just reporting that, they're having a lifestyle they're not used to. They used to be able to sell their homes, even people who are older, and sometimes rent an apartment where they are. Now even that's going up. So as you say, this isn't just one or two main cities. We used to focus on Vancouver and then Toronto. And even before it hit here in Canada, I remember we used to marvel at what was happening in New York and thought, oh my God, how can they all share a 1-bedroom apartment? And now we've got somebody on advertising, I think, in the city of Toronto to share a bed in a one-bedroom apartment here. It's a crisis.
Absolutely. And it's, across the country, obviously different markets have different average housing prices, but, it's all subjective in terms of where you live as well. So, depending on whether you're Atlantic Canada or, as you said, Vancouver, Toronto, I'm in London. So depending on where you are, the cost of living, and the wages and things like that vary. So during COVID, people found the ability to move away from the major areas and buy a large property and buy assets outside of the major centers. But now again, we're seeing the back to work is causing an impact there because people are now having to commute farther. Housing prices, because of that push out of the major areas, have gone up in the smaller rural areas. Elderly individuals who are looking to downsize simply can't find available alternatives. Now they're being forced to go on the properties that are too large for them to manage safely. But just because they
have nowhere to go,
find anything to downsize.
No, they can't. Everybody's kind of stuck here. Can a major announcement, do you see, from this federal government, Eddie, change this story finally?
I don't see a single announcement having the impact in this story. And the challenge there is the fact that there's not a one-size-fits-all solution. So what may work for me may not work for someone else and may not work for someone across the country, and it varies substantially. So I think the challenge is that there's no one solution that the government can make an announcement for that will impact enough people to really help turn this around. I think it's going to be a series of announcements and a series of actions that will need to take place at all levels across the country to really help give Canadians that confidence that this Liberal government is moving things in the right direction. As we said earlier, Sean Fraser is doing a lot of really fantastic things, but is it a matter of too little too late, or is it a matter of having such an uphill battle that it's going to take some monumental announcements and actions to really help overcome the perceptions right now?
You got it. And is there a banana peel the Conservatives can slip on out there? Eddie Shepherd, Vice President of Insights at Abacus Data. Thanks, Eddie. You have a great Sunday afternoon. Thanks for your time.
Thank you as well.
All right, it is true. Is there a banana peel? Is there an announcement? There might have been before, but this train has really started to roll. And as I'm talking to Eddie, you're probably thinking the same as me. I mean, really trying to say, go for this store. No, it's shut. Like, there's no way. During the pandemic, people are going, look, I'm leaving. I'm going to a community. And I see Calgary, the cost of living it costs more to live in Calgary for necessities than it does in the big, booming, Canada's largest city, the city of Toronto. And all those ads that Calgary was putting out. Come live here. Come live here. They say it's okay though. If you do, you can buy toothpaste, you make more money. We'll take a break and we'll return. Norman Lear and how he changed our lives. For Roy Green on this Sunday, I'm Arlene Bynon on the Roy Green Show.